Did you know that your fate is determined by your faith? Hold on. I'm gonna say that again in case you might have missed it the first time. Your fate is determined by your faith. Now you might be sitting there wondering, where is he going with this? I got you. Now there was a woman, actually no, let's make it a little bit more personal. There was a prostitute, a whore, a harlot by the name of Rahab. And Rahab, she lived within the confines of the wall. And you might be wondering, what was the wall? Well, that wall that she lived in, the one where her family resided in, was the wall of Jericho. Now, if any of you know the history of the walls of Jericho, you know what happens to the wall and the city of Jericho. And you know it doesn't end well for them. See, God promises Joshua the land of Jericho and that settlement. And you know that when God promises you something, his promises are sure. You know that they will come to pass. Well, it was no different from back in the day, because in that day, Joshua sent out 2 spies to spy on the city of Jericho. Now, the city of Jericho, they knew about Joshua. They knew that God had promised those people the land. And the people of Jericho, they grew fearful. They knew that if God were to make a promise to his people, then those promises were to come to pass. Not only were the citizens of Jericho afraid, but the king as well. See, when Joshua sent those 2 spies out there, the harlot, Rahab, took it upon herself to hide those 2 spies of Joshua within the confines of her own home. And the king, being fearful of the destruction of the city of Jericho and very paranoid, he questioned Rahab. He heard that those spies had come to visit her, so he questions her. And Rahab tells this king that yes, they stopped by to see me, but they left in the middle of the night. Go after them, pursue them. You might still be able to catch up to them. I don't know where they went, but they not with me. The entire time that she's lying to this king, she's hiding those 2 spies within her roof. See, what you got to understand is that the walls of Jericho and the city of Jericho were destined for destruction. God had promised that land to Joshua, which meant that that land was Joshua's to conquer. And there was no one and nothing that was going to stop it. Not even that giant wall barricading the city of Jericho. See, a few months ago, I had said that faith is not a feeling. Faith is not about what you feel, but it's about what you do. Everyone in the city of Jericho was afraid. They were afraid that Joshua and his army were going to come and conquer them. They were afraid that their land would be destroyed by God's people. Everybody was afraid, and they let that fear dictate what they did next. As the people of Jericho grew more afraid, they put their faith in a wall. They believed that that wall was enough to keep God's people out. God had already promised them the land, so that wall wasn't going to do anything for them. They allowed their fear to dictate their faith. Rahab knows, along with everyone else in the city of Jericho, that destruction is coming for them. Death is just outside those 4 walls of Jericho. But instead of letting fear dictate her faith, she did not let fear make her a sitting duck in the city of Jericho, but instead she took action. Rahab's faith was not about what she felt, but it was about what she's going to do next. She knew that death was coming for her. She's a prostitute. She's living in sin, living in sexual immorality. She knows that she cannot die like this. I can't die as a prostitute. I can't die like this. I can't die living in my sin. So she took a step of faith, and she hid those 2 spies within her home. Because she had faith. She believed that if she could just do something, if she could just spare the lives of those 2 spies, then God would spare her life when destruction comes upon the city of Jericho. She hid those 2 spies within her home. She was walking in faith. She didn't know what the outcome of hiding those 2 spies were, because if she was caught by the king for hiding those 2 men in her home, she would have been put to death. She lied in order to protect those 2 spies. And before she sent those 2 spies on their way, she stepped out in faith again. And she said in Joshua 2 verse 12, "Now therefore, I beg you, swear to me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you also will show kindness to my father's house, and give me a true token, and spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death." As crazy as it might sound, some of us today need the faith of the prostitute Rahab. I know that sounds insane. I know it sounds a little crazy. I'm telling you to have faith like a prostitute. But what you have to understand is that faith is what spared her life. The entire city of Jericho was wiped out, but the only one who was spared by God was a prostitute. In the city of Jericho, a prostitute is the least of these. A prostitute is probably the lowest of the low, one of the most disgraceful citizens in the entire city, but her life was spared because she stepped out in faith. She didn't let fear dictate her faith in God. See, after she had asked the spies to spare her and her family, the spies told her to stay within her home. When they attack, they will come back for her. They will make sure that her and her family are safe. Because of Rahab's faith, God turned the house of a prostitute into a house of refuge. When the walls of Jericho fell down, Joshua sent those men after Rahab and her family to protect them and ensure their safety. The fate of Rahab and her family was determined by her faith. The same way your fate today is determined by your faith. Some of us are walking down a path full of sin. It's a destructive path, a path that's only going to lead us to death, a path that's only going to lead us to our own demise. And we allow our feelings of fear, of guilt, of shame to keep us on that path. Instead of stepping out in faith, we become sitting ducks, waiting to die to our sin. But I tell you today that even in all of Rahab's sin and all her shame and all her guilt, she knew she couldn't die like this. She couldn't die a prostitute in a doomed city. She could have sat around, she could have waited for the destruction of Jericho, but she stepped out in faith. And because of her faith, her entire fate, her entire destiny had changed. Some of you have been sitting around waiting for your demise, waiting for your sin to finally consume you, to finally kill you off. But I need you today to step out in faith, to understand that God has called you for so much more. Yes, you're a sinner. We all are. We all are lowly. We all are undeserving. We all are unworthy of God's grace, mercy, and love. But even though you're covered with sin, what are you going to do next? Are you going to sit around and wait for your demise and accept your fate? Or are you going to take your fate in your own hands and step out in faith? Even in all your sin, even in all your shame, even when destruction is on the horizon, are you going to step out in faith? Your fate is determined by your faith. You can either accept it or you can change it. Some of you may think your story is over because you've sinned too many times. You've disappointed God one too many times. You feel as if you're too far from God. But let me tell you today that as long as there's a beat within your heart, it's not over till God says it's over. So if your heart is beating today, God's not done with you yet. There's still hope. There's still mercy. There's still grace. But you have to step out in faith and grab it, because dying a slave to sin is not how your story is supposed to end.